Yes, I finally found it. I finally found my dream backend builder. Ever since I've embarked on this whole no code journey and quit my job to go all in on building the #1 no code app building academy, I've been looking for the missing piece. The missing piece has always been a codeless backend builder that allows me to create APIs. So APIs are the building blocks of your business logic, if you didn't know. I've been looking for a tool that allows me to build APIs using a drag and drop block style approach. Think Zapier, but for developers. Zapier wasn't the ideal choice. Zapier was built for people who are marketers or operators and people who just need to stitch things together. But there was a certain type of backend builder that I was looking for to teach people and for myself to build fully decoupled backend applications and deploy them to the cloud. And this all has to do with a concept called decoupling, which I'll get into more in a second. But honestly, I'm so happy. So Buildship recently launched about 3 weeks ago, and I started exploring it last week. Buildship is built by the same people who powered Rowie. So many of y'all may have been familiar with Rowie. Rowie was a interface for Google Firebase or Firestore databases. But Rowie just built and launched something called Buildship, which think of it as FlutterFlow, but for the backend. And for you to understand why this is so important, let me just introduce you to a concept of decoupling. Okay, so what I'm showing you here on the screen is traditionally how full stack applications were built. So before no code and when you had to write code by hand, think a React app, this is typically the high level architecture. You would have a front end, and this would typically be React or Flutter or Vue. Then your front end would talk to a back end, and that back end could be in Ruby on Rails, Node.js, Django, and you would connect to your back end using an API. So your front end would talk to your back end via an API. Okay, and APIs can be of many types: get, post, patch, put, you name it. And your APIs would actually be connected to your database. So your front end would talk to an API. The API would talk to the database. The database would then return the data back to your front end by processing it on the back end. Okay, and then your back end would then take that data and send it back to the front end. Okay. So this is called a request response model. Okay, this is traditionally how apps were built. But recently in 2023, we saw this evolution of FlutterFlow and Bubble, right? So FlutterFlow is taking the no-code market by storm right now. But the thing about Bubble is that it's not encouraging the developers out there, non-technical developers especially, to build fully decoupled applications. What I'm seeing a lot of right now from the FlutterFlow developers that are out there, so I'm going to say today's FlutterFlow devs, what's happening is that y'all are getting very spoiled. You are taking a front end and connecting it straight to the database. And I don't blame you because that's how FlutterFlow's product was built. FlutterFlow's product was built so that you could take advantage of the built-in integration with Firestore and just read and write data directly to the database. And this is fine. Like many applications that were directly integrated with Firebase did it this way too, but this isn't the scalable way of building products. The real way you're supposed to build software products is by decoupling your services. Your front end needs to be separated from your back end. And another pattern I'm noticing, especially for those of y'all who are building AI-powered applications, some of y'all are taking your front end and integrating it directly with the ChatGPT API directly from the front end. Okay? This is terrible. Many reasons why. Your APIs are your business logic, right? Your APIs are the proprietary steps that your app is taking to perform the value that you're trying to generate for your end user. You don't want to keep those integrated with your front end. That needs to be separated. I'll tell you why in just a second. But mainly what's happening here is that you're making your ChatGPT API call directly from the front end. And your front end code, anybody can crack that open and look at all the code. Your front end code is not secure. So you're putting your API keys, you're putting all the URLs of the APIs that you're hitting inside of your front end. If someone cracks open your front end, all the code, all the APIs is readily available. So this is absolutely a no-no. You do not want to be doing this, okay? To represent that, I'm literally just going to put don't do this right here. Okay, we do not want to be doing this. We do not want to take our front end and connect it to any API directly from the front end. Here's what you need to be doing instead. And this is where the no-code market has seen a big gap. There are players like Zapier and Xano. Xano is a great player for this, and many of y'all are using Xano, but I've heard that the learning curve is kind of steep. And Xano is, I think, made for the more sophisticated developer who's coming backward into no-code. I don't think it's meant for the brand new novice person who's going from literally no coding knowledge to back-end building. I think that Buildship might be the one. Okay, but before I jump there, let me tell you how you decouple your application and what a good practice application should look like. Okay, so how you should be doing it is like this. Okay, so you have your front end, which can be built on FlutterFlow or Vue or WeWeb or whatever you want to do. Of course, you have a database. That's fine. We want you to have a database, and you're going to need it. But you also will need an API as well, because an API or a backend, right, is going to be responsible for handling a sequence of events. So this is going to be a little bit more complicated stuff, because over time, your application is going to get more complex. You're going to want to send emails. You're going to want to send text messages maybe, or create documents, or process data through AI, or update other parts of your database because your database might be getting larger. You may want to integrate with third-party services, right? Like many of y'all are building applications that integrate with other applications. So you don't integrate with applications directly from the front end because now you're tightly coupling your business logic with your front end. Instead, you need to have two separate services, your front end and your back end. And in the traditional world of software engineering, there's a motto. You want to keep your front end as dumb as possible. Your front end should have as little business logic on it, because your front end should just be something that takes orders from a back end or a database. And this is why having a separated back end is super important. Imagine this. Say you integrate all your business logic directly into your front end, and you have 20 different versions of your app that are in market. Many of y'all don't think about this, but you will be shipping a new version of your app every week, every 2 weeks, every month. Over time, there could be 30 or 40 versions of your app in the market at any given time. Okay, so if your business logic is connected to your front end, that means you have 40 versions of business logic out in the market. That's absolutely terrible, because if you make one change or your business doesn't work the way that it did 3 weeks ago, you are now outdating your users. This is why you want to decouple the services. Your front end should always be looking for the same type of data. Your back end can change anytime. And as long as it's serving the front end the right type of data or the right format of data, you can make any changes you want to your business logic. Cool. So when you want to build a decoupled app, you have your front end that accepts a certain type of data, right? A certain data format. Okay. And then you have your database, and it's okay for your front end to talk to your database. We want you to read and write data to the database, but there might be situations where your database may trigger API automations. Say like anytime a new order gets created, it will trigger your API. So we could say, when an order is created, trigger order API. Okay. And then your backend could then listen for orders being added to the database, and then it could do a couple things, right? Your backend can now say, create or generate an invoice, generate an invoice in Stripe. It can send an alert to the ordering department, alert via SMS to the fulfillment. Okay. What else can it do? Say it needed to generate a shipping label. Generate shipping label. You would then do all of these things in one step on the back end, right? And if you wanted to add anything else later on, you always could without having to update the front end. Then your API would, or your back end would handle all this, okay? So notice how you just created like a chain of automations without having to update the front end. And now this entire piece right here, this entire system is completely separated. All your front end needs to do is update the database, and then you can have a back end that's listening to your database and doing things completely asynchronously from everything else. And asynchronously means while something else is going on, it will do these tasks on the back end, right? So this is one way to do it, right? You can do it based on database triggers. And yeah, you might be thinking cloud functions. Well, okay, to use cloud functions, you need to know how to code. And many of y'all don't know how to write Node.js, and it's the first time you've been introduced to the concept of asynchronous actions, right? So for that reason is why you can be using something like Buildship to create a completely decoupled backend, okay? Cool, that's one way. But I've also seen many of y'all try to build AI applications, and let me show you what I'm seeing right now. Well, I kind of already told you a bit. I'm seeing y'all directly integrate your front end with the ChatGPT API. That's absolutely not acceptable for the reasons I've already mentioned. What you should be doing instead for the AI type of applications is you need to have an API that's maybe built on Buildship or Xano or custom coded in Node.js or Python, okay? And that API should be responsible for making the inputs to the ChatGPT API. So any of your external API services or API servers should be called upon by your API, okay? And then that data is returned to your API for further processing, and then your API returns it all back to the front end. So here's an example of like how I see that working. So here's an example of how I see that working. What you could do is your front end would call your API, and your API could be something like, say you're building an app that takes in a video of you shooting a basketball, and it runs that through some video API to analyze the video of you taking a basketball shot, use other API to come up with feedback, and then send that back to your application. What we can do is create an API called review basketball shot. Okay, and this is me kind of going over some high-level API design. Okay, so we have the front end, review basketball shot. Okay, and as input, we can take in a video path, right? Okay, now the next thing we want to do is call upon an API, another API, to analyze the video. Okay, the external API will analyze the video. Maybe we want to send an alert to our Slack channel saying, hey, somebody just uploaded a video. We can call an external API. So we'll say Slack API, alert developer that someone submitted a video. Okay, so we're doing all these things kind of one after another. So the external AI API will analyze the video. Then we'll use the Slack API to alert the developer that someone submitted a video. We will then potentially use the ChatGPT API. We'll say ChatGPT API, which will take the output from this video analyzing API and try to break it down. So let's say that the video analyzing API returns a summary of what's going on. Returns a text-based summary of the video provided. Okay, then we take that text-based summary and we pass it to ChatGPT. We say input text-based summary, output suggestions for improving the basketball shot. Okay, so cool. We've sent a Slack API hook. We've analyzed the shot through the ChatGPT API. And now what we can do is take that data, give it back to the API that was originally called upon, the review basketball shot API, and now we can send it back to the front end. Got me? So essentially what you've done here is you've moved all of your business logic to the back end, and your front end just has to look for one thing, and that's just a text summary of how you should improve your basketball shot, right? And so we can say return an object. I'll zoom in. That looks like this. And we can have a thing called feedback. And it can say, tuck your elbow and more. Got it? So as long as my front end gets an object that looks like this, no matter what happens on the back end, my front end doesn't care because my front end is dumb, right? Okay, so this is how you create a decoupled application, and I hope I drove home the idea of how you create a dumb front end that is solely relied upon its inputs and outputs to be standardized. So this is the traditional software development architecture stack. And up till today, I had not seen a no-code tool for the backend that allows a non-technical builder to build a truly scalable application. So for my application virally that I built a while ago, I had to write the backend myself. And I knew that the landscape would continue to evolve and somebody would come out with the right software for this. And it's finally here. I know this video has been a bit long, but this is going to be worth it because this will absolutely change the game. Buildship is new. It's only 3 weeks old, but they are absolutely crushing it and they've done a lot of things right. So head over to Buildship, check out what they're doing. But essentially, it's a no-code backend builder that, as a developer, as someone who built apps for 10 years by hand, I think they're doing it perfectly. It's the same objections that you can handle with front end, with FlutterFlow. You get access to the code. You can use AI to generate entire workflows. So if you know anything about coding, you can literally just type into their AI, I need a node that sends a message to Slack, creates an invoice on Stripe, sends an email and an SMS. You can do all of that in a workflow builder style format, as you can see here on the screen, right? What you see here is the ability to use the AI. You can hit generate. We can create our own REST API endpoints, and we get access to the code. And it already has building blocks for major integrations, just like I was talking to you about. So I created an account, and I'm gonna jump into Buildship real quick and show you how I would go about building a very simple AI API call. And in future lessons and videos on YouTube, I'm gonna be making more tutorials on how you can build a full stack application literally from end to end using FlutterFlow and Buildship, because I think I've made up my mind, and this is going to be the stack that I choose to use all the way through 2024 and beyond. Cool. So imagine this. I'm in FlutterFlow. I'm building my application, right? Say I have something that's going on the front end, and on click of a button, I need to dispatch an API call. Say after I create an account, I want to dispatch an API, or any button click rather. I'm just trying to show you how I see this working with FlutterFlow. Essentially, you would create an API call, and Buildship is going to provide you a URL that you can post in here. We have to first create an endpoint. And an endpoint, if you don't know on an API, is a location to a specific API process somewhere. So essentially what you see here that I'm building is a REST API call that has path hello. So let's say something like generate AI responses. Okay, so essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating an API endpoint that is of type post, and post typically means an API that accepts input. Get means APIs that accept, actually don't normally accept input, that just send you output. So I'm going to create a post API call that says generate AI responses. We'd make a call to this API directly from here inside of FlutterFlow, and then we perform all our business logic from within Buildship. So I'll hit plus. Say we want to do a couple of things. Let's say we want to do something with Slack and send a Slack message. Boom, we would add a building block for Slack, and then I'd head over to my Slack developer portal to fetch my Slack token. I'd pass in my channel name, maybe such as like the general channel on Slack, and say someone requested AI responses. Boom, so then that would send a message to Slack. Then what I'd do is I would find OpenAI and create the integration with ChatGPT. So instead of integrating with ChatGPT directly from the front end, like I've seen a lot of y'all do, instead you can do it from the back end. You punch in your prompt right here, go to OpenAI, get the secret, get the key, Not exactly sure what user request is. You can adjust your temperature and then select the model, right? Boom. So I've created this API endpoint. These two actions will trigger, and then I will return a status code 200, and then the value, I can most likely get this value from an output of OpenAI or Slack. So say OpenAI returns something, I could then say output variables OpenAI chat, and I could surround it in a string. Okay, so this is actually of type object. So potentially what I could do is say like that. Boom, and that just made it happy. So now what's going to happen is my front end is going to receive an object of type OpenAI chat, and we could probably dive into here to see what the expected data structure type of OpenAI chat would be. In further lessons, I'm going to learn all about how this works, how to parse data, how to pass data from one building block to another. But honestly, in just literally 10 minutes of exploring, I was able to pull this off without having to even learn anything. That's how intuitive it is. Again, that comes from someone who's 10 years of app development experience, but my mission is now to go all in on this stack: Figma, FlutterFlow, Firebase, Supabase, Buildship, and just take over the no-code app development landscape with this tech stack. I'm extremely stoked. It took all year 2023 of us going all in on learning this landscape, and I think we're finally at the point where we've covered the entire stack. So extremely stoked. I think that there's so much more that's going to come out of this, and we're excited to be literally the first people in the United States who are focused on accelerating app ideas through a low-code, no-code tech stack. If you can't tell, I'm stoked. This was a long video, but so much more to come. I hope you're just as excited. If you have any questions, feel free to join our free Discord community. There's a link in the description. We're also enrolling 20 new students every month for Dreams into Apps. All of our students so far are crushing it. Everyone's getting their UIs built out, starting to work on their FlutterFlow apps. Many of us are now at that point where we're integrating our database and designing the database. Soon we're going to be at the point where we need to implement custom business logic, and that's where this whole scheme of Buildship is going to come into play. So if you are interested in accelerating your app idea with our team, use the link in the description. We are on to something huge. So cool. Thanks everybody for sticking around. I'll see you in another lesson. Take care.